I'd like to report that we met on April 4th and April 25th in executive session. In both of those sessions, we discussed legal matters and matters of personnel. We'll turn next to the highlight of the meeting here, our report from students.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. So as two members of the Student Council, we're very into the topic that is going to dominate most of what we're talking about here today, and that's the courtyard renovation. As the board knows, this project has been spearheaded by the Student Council, and designs for the new courtyard have been done by high school civil engineering classes. This is a major project that will benefit students that passed for decades. The courtyard that's there now has been there for like 30 years without really changing at all. So the one that we designed this year will last for coming decades. Hopefully not as long, though. Student Council, with the help of Mrs. Pearsall, has planned many fundraisers to make sure the renovation will be the best it can possibly be. The one we need the most community help with, and why I chose this podium to talk about, is the Community Courtyard Dash. The run is a 5K and a 1-mile fun run, and we're relying on a big turnout for the fun and helpful event. So I sure expect everyone here to be there. All right, everyone, you guys too. The run is this Sunday, April 30th at 8:45 for the fun run at Radnor High School. If you are interested, please go to runsignup.com and search for Community Courtyard Dash. So I better see everyone jot this down. Runsignup.com, Community Courtyard Dash. If you cannot attend but would like to make a donation, if you go to the runsignup.com, go to Community Courtyard Dash, there is an option to make a donation. This is not the only way Student Council plans to have the community participate. We'll be looking for donations in the future, and that'll be put on the district webpage, and I'll talk about that in May. This is a project that the students have led, and we want to see it be the best it can be. So as a community, we really want everyone to get involved and everyone to help out, because even if your kids are in kindergarten right now, it's going to be their courtyard too. It'll be mine for a year. It'll be hers for 2 years, but everyone past us, it'll be there for 4 years, and that's what makes it more important for us. So, thank you.
Nice work. So, moving on to the topic of sports, the annual Katie Sampson Lacrosse Festival is this weekend, and the girls and boys lacrosse teams will be playing a few games throughout the day. If you can, please come, because the money raised goes to research and a number of treatment centers and programs for sports injuries. Next, the girls and boys crew team finished as the #1 public school throughout the spring season and is moving on to championships. And in addition to that success, the softball team has been on a great track this season and won their most recent game against Springfield last week. And finally, the track team is headed off to Penn Relays this Thursday, so good luck to them. In conclusion, other highlights to wrap up this month include sophomore semi and student government elections for next year. Thank you for having us, and have a great night.
Thank you guys very much. To a less exciting part of the meeting, our report from the superintendent.
That hurts, Mr. Falcone. And tonight, because we're talking about the budget, I'm willing to forego my report since we wanted to continue the budget discussion as needed. So
I knew that.
Yes.
See, so I knew that. Next, we'll look to public comment. Citizens are welcomed and encouraged to address the board during this period of the meeting, to comment on portions of the meeting on the agenda or other topics related to Radnor Township School District. We ask that you please print your name on the sign-in sheet in the back of the room on the table, and when you come to the podium, if you would please state your name, your street address, and topic that you intend to address. Individual comments should be limited to not more than 4 minutes as per our current board policy. Should you be unable to attend the board meeting, submit your comment by email to boardquestions@rtsd.org or in written form to Mr. Michael Petiti, Radnor Township School District, 135 South Wayne Avenue, Wayne, Pennsylvania, 19087. Public comment, please. Welcome, Debbie.
Hi, everybody. Debbie Singer, 169 South Spring Mill Road in Villanova. First, I want to thank Lydia for being so outspoken about class size. I want to thank Patty for being outspoken about music. These are two issues that are of great importance to me. I have been vocal about class size since my daughter was in kindergarten. She graduated last year. My personal feeling is that when you start raising class sizes, it's the kiss of death to a school district. For example, because of the work I do, I come in contact with a lot of music teachers. And yesterday just coincidentally, I spoke to the music teacher at Haverford School for Boys. Her daughter was at Agnes Irwin, switched to Baldwin. She would be an incoming 6th grader. And Annie was asking me about the middle school. Of course, I asked Maureen if she'd talked to her, and I said, you could come and visit the school. But what I just heard tonight concerns me because I'd really be hard-pressed to, encourage her daughter to come with these big class sizes. And the other thing was on the same vein as that is that when they say it's manageable, that they lost teachers, I don't know what that means. I was hoping to hear about the impact with regard to student growth. You may not have that data. I don't know when you will have it, but that's where we're really going to know what the impact is. So I hope that you'll share that information with us when you get it. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Debbie. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle, Newtown Square. The budget work session agenda states that public comment will be available at 7 p.m. And really what it should state is public comment will not be available at 7 p.m. because there was no public comment. On December 20th, 2016, the board revised and adopted policy, I guess it's 6006, meeting and public participation. The stated purpose in this policy includes the following language. This policy is, quote, intended to recognize the value to school governance of public comment on educational issues and the importance of encouraging members of the public to participate in board meetings. Well, my original comments mentioned that tonight's work agenda, the budget work session agenda, eliminates public comment at the beginning of the meeting. I didn't really anticipate that it would eliminate public comment both at the beginning and the end of the meeting. And also, by the way, saying that the comment would occur at 7 p.m. was when the business meeting was scheduled. The search engine on the district's website reveals only one other budget work session agenda. This is the work session from January 7th, 2016, which includes public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting, of the work session. Mr. Falcone, the board's president, is responsible for this step backwards. As a lawyer, he has shown an eagerness in the past to find loopholes to eliminate public comment. For example, by incorrectly characterizing two separate policy meetings as one recessed meeting. Eliminating the public's opportunity to provide valuable input on a budget paid for by taxpayers is not following a policy that stresses the importance of encouraging members of the public to participate. My second topic is about the lack of a current and functional operational chart for the administration. Staffing is a topic that was covered in tonight's budget workshop, although I didn't really hear much discussion on the administration in terms of staffing. The board's policy 008, titled Organization Chart, was revised and adopted by the board way back on September 23, 2014. The policy states that the board shall establish an organizational chart for the district administrative staff that shall show lines of primary responsibility and will clarify relationships of one position to another. How does the board look at administrative staffing with a chart dated October 14th, 2014? That's the one that's online. As was pointed out previously, no one on this administrative chart reports to the Director of Secondary Education. That's this position here. No one reports to him. Although a director of operations is listed, there is no longer a director of operations. He left last summer with a huge retirement package of hundreds of thousands of dollars. What other listings are incorrect? The policy states that the board's responsibility is to approve changes to this chart. And once again, Mr. Falcone has dropped the ball. This is particularly irresponsible after hiring a new superintendent and expecting him to succeed with inaccurate information. The enrollment projections from the budget workshop give class size recommendations, and this is a topic that you covered pretty thoroughly during your meeting, from March 1990 and March 1991. And I agree with the discussion that class size recommendations were made over 25 years ago, and they should be reviewed. And perhaps a ratio of teachers to students should also be considered. However, right now, grades 6 through 8 in the middle school are recommended to have a class size no higher than 25 with an average of 22. And in the information provided, you can't tell if some classes what the actual class size is, but you can see the averages. So in terms of core classes, which were mentioned at length, the 7th grade language arts class, the 7th grade CT language arts class, the 7th grade accelerated language arts, 8th grade language arts, 8th grade accelerated language arts, 7th grade social studies, 7th grade accelerated social studies, 8th grade social studies, 6th grade science, 7th grade accelerated science, 8th grade accelerated science, 7th grade math honors course, and the Algebra 1 seminar are the core classes that all exceed an average of 22, which is recommended. And then what was mentioned also in terms of languages, the 29 for French, the 27.5 for German, 29 for Latin. Really, I was shocked when I read these numbers. And it was surprising to me, really, that you haven't heard more from parents related to this, because they seem incredibly high, at least from this information. So really, if I were to give you all a letter grade on this performance, and let's make it easy, pass, fail, you all would fail. So the fact is that in this next agenda, which I'm now going to address just briefly, the information for the final budget seems like it's attached right onto a workshop. So it makes you wonder, well, was the workshop supposed to change the numbers at all? Because it seems like the numbers are already written for a vote, so that it's almost preordained and not as a result of discussion or meaningful discussion from the budget workshop. And when I took the numbers and divided it, the $96 million number, and divided it by 3,770 students, we are spending approximately, and I know it's kind of a broad way of looking at it, $25,627.40 per student. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Welcome, Roberta.
Good evening. Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road. It's very helpful to have the materials from the budget, the session previous to this budget meeting, and I think it's very helpful to have all those enrollment numbers. And as someone who was involved with all those class size guidelines and drafting them in decades ago, I realize how important they are. And I also realize, based on my experience, that over time the needs of students have probably been magnified and increased greater than they were at the time those guidelines were installed. And I would also like to mention that I think the class size, particularly in those courses where writing is involved, needs to be considered closely, because to encourage kids to write means you have to really do a lot of work with students, and it's important to assign work, read compositional work, and then provide meaningful feedback. And that does take more time than perhaps other subject matters. I would also like to encourage the board to consider the March Supreme Court ruling, which stated that school districts must give students with disabilities the chance to make meaningful, appropriate, ambitious progress in their work. And I think that as we are held accountable to those standards, that may also make a difference as you move forward in your budget considerations. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. What's happening, Dave? Welcome.
Hello, how's everybody doing tonight? It's been a long night so far, right? David Wood, President, Radnor Township Education Association. I just wanted to thank you for tonight's session. I think from the board standpoint, it seemed like you got a lot of information tonight that you hadn't had before. I saw the look of surprise and disappointment on some of your faces, and so I think this is a good step in moving forward to be able to actually see the numbers that teachers are seeing day to day in the classroom. I know that in the past 6 months or so, you've been looking at teacher absences, and one of the things I would encourage you to look at and to study maybe is the impact of class size on teacher absences, because I know as you look at your charts that you've been receiving that teacher absences at the middle school are higher than the other buildings. Maybe that is an impact of your class size increases in certain areas, and it's adding to teacher illness. That was just something that occurred to me as I looked at the class size numbers and reflected on where our numbers are the greatest in absences, and maybe that has an impact among other things. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is I think Julia may have asked the question about class size. Are these the actual numbers? And I know one example is at Ithan, there are IU students that roll into classrooms, and they're not counted on those numbers. So there are classes that were, this year with the IU students included, at a class size of 27 or 28 at Ithan this year, and those are not included in the numbers moving forward. So you'd have to look at where IU students, now I know they don't go in for a full day, but it's still a student that should count towards that class size. And yeah, just something to look at and think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, Cindy. Welcome.
Good evening, Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. I, too, would like to express my disappointment with not being able to make any public comment during the workshop. When the workshop was announced as being 1 hour prior to the board meeting, I felt that there was no way that we were ever going to make a 1 hour deadline or 1 hour time frame to discuss staffing. And my understanding of a workshop, a lot of give and take, and there was a major presentation by the staff this evening, this late in the budget process. It's my understanding that tonight, and it's part of the agenda, that you will be voting on a preliminary budget, which means there isn't a lot of room for give and take prior to the decision in May. The numbers are pretty firm, at least it's my understanding. In sitting in the budget workshop, and it's going to be discussed a little bit further, in my understanding, in this meeting, the term co-teachers was brought up quite frequently in middle school, and we talked about staffing and looking at the number of students per classroom. Should we be looking at the number of students per teacher rather than number of students per classroom? And knowing, at least through the committee meetings that I've attended, the board meetings I've attended over the last year, there are 4 watch positions. Well, sitting here this last hour and almost an hour and a half, there are more positions than 4 that have been talked about and may appear to be needed. And where is that money coming from as we're voting on a budget this evening? I know it's a preliminary budget. So that's part of my disappointment. The other, in understanding the presentation of the original budget, is the inclusion of the Act 1 numbers. And if I understand Ms. Deco correctly, that it's required that we include that 2.5% when the budget is presented, or it won't be included in the final, or won't be approved by the state or whatever in the final decision. That means that every year for the foreseeable future, there's going to be an increase in the residents of Radnor Township taxes. We're starting out already ahead, and we're already adding another discussion that happened early on was that the exemptions that we would go out for was just in case we needed them. And there was no way on God's green earth that anybody sitting up there in front of me thought that there wasn't any way we were going to need those. So honest and open discussion with the public, I would like to request also. Going through a few things, just a couple things on the minutes before you approve them. On my comments, just a few things that might make a little more clarity for people so they don't have to go back and look at the agenda. On item number 14, suggesting that the wording has been and will be provided is a very short, and what I meant that is if the event or the dollars have already been spent and we're at the end of a year, it doesn't make sense to make to ask that the board vote that it will be approved or will be provided. And the other was item number 15. The minutes state that I said that concerned about the purpose and objective of the form. Well, the form was the Black Student Union request, and my concern was the line as a safe space emotionally for the students, and I think that is very important that that be included in the minutes. One other point in the public comment at the end of the meeting in the minutes, it shows that it says Dave Wood, Maya K. Van Rossum, with a comma in between, and that to me doesn't say that as what happened, Dave came up and spoke for Maya, and I would like to request that change to the minutes. One other quick thing before getting to the agenda. As you know, there are several people in the public that take time and prepare for each one of these meetings so that we understand what you all are discussing. And we go to the website and pull up and print the agenda and the attachments. Well, there were attachments that were added yesterday. One very important was the PowerPoint on the final budget and also the financial reports. And the term last modified is used for the two items that were added just yesterday, and the key is they weren't last modified, they were only added yesterday. And a few points on the agenda. I know the time is running short, but I would like to bring these up. Item number 13 is board recognition of student activities and clubs, and there's another request for a club, Minding Your Mind, which with all the discussions that are going on these days with drug use, depression, et cetera, in the schools, this is an important club, and I don't know the individual because I'm not involved with the school district, but I would hope that the faculty sponsor is qualified to be the sponsor of this club, to have some kind of a mental health or background, because that would be very important before this is approved. Again, I'm going to request item number 14 for board approval for student trips. I know that this policy we have been asking for, the public, many months for a policy as to how decisions are made, and my understanding it will be a decision made by the Finance Committee, but once again, I'm requesting that the Finance Committee put their heads together and come up with some sort of a decision as to what parameters there are as to how decisions on which trips are financed and which trips are not. Also, I would like to there's a policy number 004, orientation program for new board members. Two points on that. One is that the program shall be held within 2 months of appointment or election. I would hope that the program could be done in a shorter period of time than 2 months, knowing that the elections are in November and we're coming up to a holiday season, that the board members would be prepared to start off in January. And also to thank you for adding the Sunshine Law to the list of sessions that will be covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Goldberg. I live at 317 West Laurier Place, Bryn Mawr, and I'd like to address class size. My family moved to Radnor in 2005, and my 4 children have attended Ithan Elementary School for the past 11 years. Both my husband and I attended public schools, and we moved to Radnor area because we had heard how good the public schools are. Initially, the class sizes were 17 to 20 students per class. Radnor School District prided itself on smaller classes, especially at the elementary level, compared with other area school districts. Currently, my twin daughters are in 4th grade at Ithan, and their classes have 27 students each. This is detrimental to our students, as their teachers are overwhelmed and stressed, which is not conducive for a healthy learning environment. The students are not able to get the individual attention or differentiated teaching they need to be effective learners. Data from studies over a period of years have pointed to a number of trends as a result of lowering class size. First, gains associated with small classes generally appear when the class size is reduced to less than 20 students. Second, gains associated with small classes are stronger for the early grades. I would like to see class size return to smaller classes, ideally 20 or fewer, for our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we will move to reports from our board committees. Committee chairpersons may report on items pertinent to the agenda or of general importance to board business. Curriculum.
Curriculum, the curriculum committee met on April 18th. We actually had really only one major agenda item, and that was a review of Math and Focus, which was provided by Dr. Murray. Let me encourage you to go back and review the video if you are interested. We are doing well with Math and Focus. The report was very encouraging, and while there are a few tweaks that she and the teachers are following up on, this is thus far looks to be a fine program that's been well received in doing its job. So well done, Kelly. Thank you very much. And that's it for curriculum.
Thank you, Mrs. Michelson. Facilities.
Thank you. The Facilities Committee met on April 4th. There were 3 items on our agenda. Item number 1 was drug dogs at the high school. Item number 2 was the Radnor Way parking. This was an after-school issue with the sports teams. And item number 3 was an update on the Radnor Trail. One of these items is on your agenda tonight. That is the drug dogs. It is item number 7. I just want to make a comment about that because it came at us rather quickly. I heard about it the Friday before the facilities meeting, that it was going to be on the agenda. And I just want us to be extremely sensitive that we let families know that we're going to do this, and that it's important to me that this is presented in a way that it's not like accusatory, that we think we've got a major problem, that we're going to catch somebody, because I don't think that's the case. I've had people ask me, is this really a huge problem in high school? I think it's really important that we position this, if we choose to do it, that this is a preventative measure to try to keep our high schoolers safe. I think that people were surprised that we're going to go, or some people were surprised that we're going to go to that measure. So I'm just putting that out there, that there was discussion of that. And our next meeting will be on May 2nd. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia.
Can I just want, I'm a little concerned about any editorial around that kind of stuff. Could I ask that we get an update directly from Mr. Batchelor in terms of why we're talking about the canine dogs? Because we do have a problem. And so, albeit something that we want to make sure that it's not accusational, but could we talk about that, please?
Okay, so
let's do that after our reports, please. Let's finish our reports.
I have a long explanation that was part of our meeting, if you didn't get a chance to see it, Patty, where Mr. Batchelor did specify that the principal of the high school, Dan Bechtel, is requesting this, and he outlined the measures that we already do.
I know, but that's why I'd like him to do it
Mr.
again.
Batchelor will update the board at the end of our, if that's okay. Is that all right? Great, thanks. Finance.
Yeah, real short. We did budget, which you're going to hear about tonight, which includes capital, and we talked about our continued review of what's going on with substitute teachers, where we are, and whether there's anything the Finance Committee should be talking about doing. That's it.
Thank you. Policy, Ms. Stern.
Yes, the Policy Committee met April 4th. We have one policy on the agenda for first read tonight. It's Policy 004, Orientation for New Board Members. This is a new policy. It's going to provide for an orientation program for new board members. The next Policy Committee meeting will meet Tuesday, May 2nd at 5 p.m. and in the Administration Building. Thanks.
Thank you. Government Relations and Communications, Mrs. Goldman.
Government Relations and Communications met on April 4th, and in our meeting, Michael Petiti, our Director of Communications, gave us an update on the status of the new district communications policy he is creating. At this point, our committee has signed off on the policy draft, and we are passing it on to the Policy Committee for their review at their May meeting. Michael is going to continue to work towards having the communication policy and its accompanying ARs in place for the start of the 2017-18 school year. The second agenda item was a follow-up to the presentation to our committee on March 20th by Adrian Irving, the Director of Legislative and Community Services for the Delaware County Intermediate Unit. Adrian's presentation had prompted some questions from committee members about the impact on Radnor's education funding as a result of the active education tax credit legislation. And we also wanted to know how the joint session of the House and Senate Education Committee's hearing on ESSA had gone, since it was taking place on the same day that Adrian was presenting to us. So Adrian provided written follow-up on both of those, and we had a discussion about it. The third agenda item was a recap of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District's education town hall meeting with state legislators who represent that school district. They happen to be State Senators Killian and McGarrigle and House Representative Kruger-Branicki. Chuck and I attended, along with 3 Radnor High School students who were doing a 9th grade integrated project on education funding issues that could impact Radnor. The students found the forum to be very informative, and Chuck gave the committee a nice overview of what an interesting and interactive experience the town hall was. And that conversation led to our next 2 agenda items, where we discussed our committee's annual legislative events that we host here in Radnor. The Federal Legislative Outreach Meeting, which will be coming up in June, where we invite our federal representatives, Senators Toomey and Casey, to come to speak to our committee, and our Fall State Legislative Breakfast. We discussed exploring the possibility of using the Wallingford-Swarthmore model for the state legislative breakfast, perhaps going forward. That would mean that instead of having a breakfast, we might consider having a brief dinner with the legislators, board and admin, the typical attendees, and then follow that with an education town hall that would be open to the community. So we're going to be discussing this further at our next meeting. We also talked about next month's DCIU legislative breakfast, and I'm going to turn this over to Chuck because he was checking into the date of that breakfast because he'd like to encourage his colleagues to attend. And also, Chuck attended the Pennsylvania School Board Association's Advocacy Day in Harrisburg yesterday, and he wanted to talk a little bit about that.
I'll be brief. It's May 19th, the Legislative Council meeting. It's a breakfast. We would encourage all of the school board members to attend. That it should be a good meeting. Also, there's a town meeting, a regional town meeting, May 4th from 6 to 8, and that's up at it's up in Plymouth meeting. It's a little closer than the last one was, so I would encourage you to come to that. Yesterday, I did have an opportunity to go up to Harrisburg, and we spoke with Senator Leach's staff. We spoke with the chairman of Appropriations Committee, Saylor's staff. We spoke with Representative Vitale. I met with the staff from Senator McElhenney's. I think they put me in there because I'm Irish, but I'm not quite sure why. I'm not quite sure why that was. And we also talked with Representative Santora. It was a very positive day up there. We were received very, very well. The advantage that we have when we go up there as school board members is we're not all the same political party. So we come up there as a mixed batch, and we're there for the education piece. The one thing that we are concerned about is the new bill that's up there. I think it's Bill 97, and we would encourage people to call their representatives. We're not in favor of that, PSBA. We think it's giving away too much power to the Charter School Appeals Committee. So if there was a charter that came to Radnor, we turned it down, it goes to the appeal to the state level. And the way they're trying to shift how that commission is made up is, in our opinion, in favor of the charter schools. So we want that to be looked at. So we would encourage our people out there to contact their legislators and say, we're opposed to that. That's about it for that.
May I just add, the May 4th meeting, where did you say that was? Because that's a Pennsylvania School Board Association
Right.
Town Hall. And where is that, Chuck? It's at the high school?
No, let's see, that's at Central Monco Technical School, 821 Plymouth Road, Plymouth
Okay.
Meeting. So I will get that information to you if anybody's interested. You do have to sign up for that. You have to go to the members page on PSBA and sign up.
I also
Thanks,
just
Chuck.
wanted
Thanks,
to
Amy.
mention that the next meeting is Tuesday, May 2nd, and it's a new time that Government Relations typically meets at 4, and the time for that meeting is being moved starting in May to, at this point, at 7 o'clock, and it'll still be in the same location, though.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to Mr. Batchelor to have a quick discussion around the drug dogs.
No, and I think all the board members' comments are important comments, and it is something that the district has looked at as a deterrent. We're not looking to set this up as an I gotcha. It is as much about a deterrent, but it is also based on feedback, feedback that we have received from students and from parents with concerns. We are there is no high school in this country, public or private, that is immune to the impact and the effects of, unfortunately, of illegal drugs and alcohol. And we have found from talking to other districts that having a drug dog, and especially having it contracted with the organization we're looking to contract it as, it can stand as a deterrent. Some of the students who don't want to see this type of activity in their school, have expressed that they would they like to know that the district is taking a firm stand on that as well. Mr. Bechtold has done a really excellent job of sharing right after the preliminary discussion with the school board and facilities. We then, Mr. Bechtold shared it with the community at the high school and has shared it with the students and has talked to them. He plans on setting up an assembly. And Mr. Bechtold, if I go wrong here, jump in, but set up an assembly to share with the students how that will work, an opportunity for them to actually meet this organization that provides the InterQuest Detective K-9 will come as part of an assembly. They actually recommend, as a company, that there's no reason for the school to be on lockdown, that it's something that can just be part of the day. We are discussing whether or not, when we actually do it, we may actually hold kids in the classroom as it's done. But all the details to how this will proceed and how it works will be shared with the students in assembly, and I know has also been shared already through some communication with the parents and family. We have a wonderful high school. I've been so impressed with so many of the things I have seen at our high school. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are sending a very clear message, and our students, the vast majority of our students appreciate hearing that. I do respect, though, and understand those students who feel they don't want to have their individual liberties taken away, and we are very aware of that as well. We are very sensitive, to student privacy and all of that as well. But we think it's very important that as a district, we draw a very clear line, and we want to make sure that our students are making healthy choices, and that those few that might choose to bring it into the school, that we're going to put measures in to try to prevent that from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelor. Next, we'll go to our priority discussion action item, which is a financial item, so I'll turn it over to Mrs. Booker.
Okay, so at the Finance Committee meetings off and on, as you saw earlier in the presentation that Michelle put up, we had seen some updates on the budget each month. Right now, the budget that's before you, I guess I want to make some clarifications. Yes, we heard a lot of information this evening. Yes, there's more work that needs to be done on the budget. However, according to the rules and the guidelines provided by Act 1, we need to take a vote on this proposed final budget. It will come back before this board. Edits can be made. We will discuss it further at our next Finance Committee meeting if there are other things we want to move around or consider. Just because we're doing this doesn't mean that we are precluded from making other changes. We certainly can't go up once we do this proposed final. I don't know if Michelle, if you can clarify that.
You actually can go up.
Okay.
It would not be my recommendation, but certainly once you release a millage rate, I don't think that your taxpayers are looking to have that rate be higher when they get their tax bill in
But that
July.
doesn't mean we can't go lower. So in terms of the final number. So did you want to go over, presentation?
Yes, I have a presentation prepared, so we'll go over that.
Oh my God, I have so many papers.
So some of these things you probably have seen before. This presentation has a little bit more detail in it than the presentation from earlier because staffing was the most important thing we were dealing with at that meeting, as well as the schedule. So the approach that administration took to this year's budget process was different than what we have done in the past. We did the proposed final budget contains a maintained budget, which, as Mr. Batchelor explained earlier, maintains current programs that we have. It does not include any new initiatives. It does not include any capital improvements or maintenance. It does now include the potential use of fund balance. Originally, it did not, but currently it does. That's that $490,000 that we talked about earlier. The preliminary budget that was approved back on January 24th of 2017 had projected revenues of $95,000, projected expenditures of $96,000, or a shortfall of $1.5 million. That preliminary budget that was approved included a tax increase of 0.5731 mils, or the maximum amount allowed by the Act 1 index. As I previously said, when we approved that preliminary budget, we have to show PDE that we have a need for exceptions. So with a shortfall of 1.5, we were able to show that we did have a need. And so we applied for those exceptions and were approved by PDE. Again, the summary of changes you can see in February. We only had a few small changes that we were able to incorporate. So we incorporated those in to try to continue to work on that shortfall. In March, we had some additional reductions or increases in revenue that we were able to make. Most notable, the Act 1 exceptions that were approved for special education and for retirement were incorporated into the proposed final. And then in April, we've included some additional reductions that we had. You can see we had a reduction for medical benefits. We received our second rate look, and we also used a portion of our retirement escrow account. So with all of those changes that we made since February, we now have what we call a balanced budget. So that means that we are either meeting our expenditures through a use of increased revenues, or using fund balance. But again, we don't have any new initiatives in this budget, and there are no capital improvements. So the proposed final budget includes a real estate increase of 0.7868 mils, or 3.43%. So what does that mean to the average homeowner? I have 3 slides that I have prepared, and based on a low value, a median value, and a high assessed value, we can show you what the impact is. So if your home has an assessed value of $274,000, you can see what the millage impact is here. So this taxpayer would pay an additional $216 next year for their real estate taxes. Oops. If your home value is $472,000, which is the average home value in Radnor Township, you can see here that you would have an increase of $372,000 or $372. And if your home is assessed at $700,000, you can see that that tax increase would mean $562 more for you. So let's talk a little bit about the capital plan. We've been reviewing that at committee meetings. Been looking at it at the Finance Committee meeting as well as facilities. Potential projects that have been identified total $1.8 million. There's cash on hand of $682,000, which would mean that we would need a transfer of $1.1 million if we wanted to complete all of the projects that we have identified. One of the projects that we've identified that we're still looking at closely is the bleachers over at the high school. We have the bleacher report currently. We know that those bleachers, with some minor repairs, will be able to have additional useful life for several more years. So we'll be talking about that in more detail at the facilities meeting coming up on May the 9th. We'd like to be able to utilize some time to try and get a better estimate for those bleachers, as well as explore options for the replacement. So one of the things that we always like to look at is where the different revenue sources come from. You can see based on this pie chart that the bulk of our revenues are coming from local sources. So what that means for Radnor is we get about 16% from the state, but 83% of the revenues that fund our programs here are coming from our local taxpayers or other local sources. So some highlights. Again, the millage increase is 3.43%, 0.7868 mils for a total millage rate of 23.713. We based the revenues on our local past history, and we budgeted at 98.5% collection. State subsidies were based on the governor's budget, which was released in February. It includes all the changes that he talked about, especially that one that's notable, of course, is the reduction to our transportation subsidy. It continues the continuation of the state reimbursement at 50% for Social Security and retirement. Federal revenues were budgeted at 16-17 levels. However, Dr. Barczyk just told me yesterday, I believe, that we are going to see a slight increase in Title I funding. So we'll incorporate that in. That's revenue neutral, though, because what you get in an increase, you must spend. So it really doesn't have any impact on the budget. When we look at this slide, this is our expenditures. God bless you. Expenditures by object. Again, you can see from the pie chart, the biggest, our highest expenditures, salaries and benefits, make up just under 70% of our budget. So salaries, if we look just solely at salaries, they're expected to increase just under $1.6 million. And we budgeted our salaries based on currently approved collective bargaining agreements. So if we had recent agreements that were approved, we've incorporated those increases into this budget. You can see in the area of benefit costs that those are increasing by 1.7. So just those two items alone more than utilize what revenues that we can generate from our Act 1 increase. We did get some information regarding our prescription coverage. We talked about that briefly at the Finance Committee last week. We did get information that our rate is going to be going down considerably, roughly $300,000 worth of a reduction that we have not yet incorporated into this proposed final budget. So as we move forward, we'll be taking that reduction into consideration and making some recommendations regarding what to do with those funds. We talked about at the Finance Committee, Susan Michelson, I believe you asked me how much we had budgeted for prescription coverage, and I just wanted to make a correction to that. Our budget contains $2,559,468 for prescription coverage. $2 million. The $6 million is what we have budgeted for our health care.
So is that one inside the other, or is it 2 million plus 6 million?
It's 2 million plus 6.
Yikes.
We're required to record those costs separate because they're self-funded. So overall, when we look at the budget, our expenditures are increasing just under $3.4 million over what was budgeted for 2016-17. So some of the things that we haven't talked about, we talked about the retirement escrow in finance, but we didn't talk about whether or not there was the desire to use some additional fund balance to perhaps pay for new initiatives or capital projects. So that is the bulk of the conversations that we'll have to be having as we move forward to final budget approval in May. This slide just shows what we would have available in the event that we wanted to make that consideration. So I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. Two questions, though. Can you go back to the slide where it said the original millage and the amount it generated? Okay, so no, that's the page, but it doesn't. This is not the page. We've seen it other places, but I can't.
Previously, we had looked at that in regards to.
My question really is, how much revenue does the index generate for us this year?
I happen to have it.
Perfect.
The Act 1 index will generate $1,777,471.
Okay.
$1,777,471.
Okay, so then if you scoot ahead to the CBA page, where just our collective bargaining agreements, just in salary alone, I mean, if nothing else had gone up, just by virtue of our current commitments, we barely, index is barely enough to cover it.
Correct.
Okay. So just, people need to understand that index is what we have to work with, but it's not really related to what our real expenses end up going up by, even just CBA alone. That was one question I have for now.
Susan, may I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Because it's interesting. I did those calculations today, and I don't know if that would help you because I was thinking the same thing. And if our additional revenue through the 3.43% would be $2,455,471, and the increase that we're obligated to pay for salaries and benefits is $3,341,525. So before anything else, we have a shortfall in meeting that obligation of $886,054. I think that's where you were headed, but I just wanted to give you those numbers if you wanted them.
Oh, appreciate it. No, I was just really looking at the index alone. But the question I has to do with, so we don't have year-end projections, and that tonight, which is fine. But I am curious in our budget binder. There are some pretty wide swings, and we didn't get into that. But in the places where the year-to-date revenue is off or the year-to-date expenditures are off, soon will we have a conversation about where you think those numbers are going to end, for the year, what you project them to be?
We will have that conversation at the May Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, May, great.
So we'll do that in May.
All right.
One of the things that you have to remember is we use a modified accrual basis, so we don't have all of our expenses in that we may know about. So we will continue to accrue those expenditures as we work through the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th. And we also have not made all of our necessary budgetary transfers.
Right.
When we get to this point in the year, sometimes we save those budgetary transfers and do them as part of the year-end closing, just because it makes it a lot easier for our building administrators and our department heads not to have to constantly be doing transfers. So.
But a couple of highlight questions. Are you expecting our basic ed subsidy? You know, we budgeted 1.9 million and only 900,000's come in.
We get a big bulk of that in June.
Okay, so you are still expecting that. And then there was another big one, the 1.8 for Presbyterian Village and St. Edmunds. You budgeted 1.8. We've only had 895 come in. What do you think? When are you thinking that's coming in?
So St. Edmunds, we bill that on a quarterly basis. So I anticipate that those revenue dollars will come in. A lot of districts wait and pay that all at the end of the year. So in September, we'll see a large amount of dollars come in for St. Edmunds and the village. And hopefully some of the changes that we've made in terms of how we track those students and how we bill them back to their home districts will start to pay off, and we'll start to see that revenue come in more frequently and quicker. Because what I found when I first came here is that sometimes it was taking as long as 2 years for us to get our revenue dollars back. So we've been working with the special ed department to make some changes and hopefully speed up the receipt of those dollars.
Okay. I have some comments, but I just wanted to get those couple of questions answered so you could sit. Thank you.
All right.
Are there any other questions? Because I have a couple of things I wanted to go over. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Michelle? Oh, yeah, if you want to do the questions from there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I can do them from here.
No, I'm just making sure that we're a few things out of the budget binder. I did have a question about projections, so happy to hear that. Trying to reconcile a few other things. In the budget binder on the lead page of the revenue, on the current real estate taxes line, it shows 4.7%, whereas this proposal is 3.43. That includes the homestead stuff, right?
It does. The homestead will actually be backed out of that number, and it will be moved into the state revenue side as soon as PDE releases that dollar amount.
Okay, but otherwise, the net number here is the 3.43.
Correct.
On that line. So I had, and mind you, this might be a really stupid question because it really should make total sense to me, but it doesn't for some reason. The revenue number of 96,121,000 versus the expenditure number, which in our binder, I'm assuming what's in this binder now reflects all the edits that we've made over the 3 months, right?
It does.
So so if I look at revenue versus expenditures, and look at the year over, the increase versus in each of the years, revenue's increasing 4.345 million. Expenditures is 4.3545. Expenditures is 3.3. So that looks like a surplus. How dare I use the word? Why is it that that's aligned like that?
So one of the things that you have to remember is what we're utilizing in revenue in the current fiscal year is substantially more to help us balance. So we're using fund balance, and we're using a larger portion of our retirement escrow fund. We're using like $1.2 million. So
on the revenue side.
On the revenue side.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of skews that number and makes it look as if our revenue is going up substantially, but it's really only going up substantially because what is in 16-17 does not include those two components that I just talked about. It doesn't include those uses.
It doesn't include the fund balance uses.
It doesn't include the fund balance uses.
So it would be helpful somewhere along the way, even if it's a notation at the bottom or a line that's kind of below the chart that explains that. Because when you look at it, you go, what? Mm-hmm. And we used to, the pendulum has swung both ways from one end to the other in terms of we put a line in that shows transfers or fund balance use, and then we took it out again, and then we put it back in and we take it out. So if anybody just picks this budget up, you can't follow that bouncing ball. So it would be helpful, even if it's a note on the bottom or something at the bottom. Similarly, at the bottom of the expenditure sheet, where we have, and I guess really it probably is the same, it's the same exact idea, but on whether you put it on the revenue side or you put it on the expense side, there needs to be something that shows that it was that the budget was balanced by using fund balance.
And I can add that.
Yeah, because it doesn't
Certainly.
show that, right?
Yeah, it does not.
Otherwise, if you do that comparison to this one, we have an unbalanced budget.
Absolutely. If you would look just at revenues versus expenditures, it would appear that it's unbalanced.
Yeah.
Which, if you use fund balance, it technically is unbalanced.
Ah.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. And then back to the, well, you don't have to go back to the slide per se, but I just wanted to clarify that the increase in salaries that are on that line, taking into consideration the discussion that we had earlier this evening and the interest by many to increase staff in certain places to make sure our class sizes are what they are, that line item is not just CBA. That's our entire increase in salary across everything, taking into consideration CBA. So any new positions that were added or positions removed or whatever, that's the total salary number, not just the incremental because of some bargaining agreement.
Correct. The only thing that it does not include would be watch positions.
Perfect, which was on that miscellaneous line.
Right. That's in a miscellaneous area. It's clearly identified as contingency for personnel.
Right. But the reason I bring this up is because while it's healthy and I think important for this organization to have the operational discussion about what we think our staffing should be, separate from our budget, the hard, cold reality is every one of those new positions, if we want to add new positions, this budget considers taxing our community the maximum we can via exceptions and Act 1. So we don't really have headroom to even tax any more to hire more people or to have a higher salary bucket. We've already used all that up. And so if this board wants to give, and the reason we're here, the reason we did those cuts last year was exactly for that reason. We had already maxed out the taxing that we could do to our community. And I guess to some degree, and people have brought it up, the hard, cold reality is we're going to be in a position of having to cause Act 1 as a minimum and likely exceptions for the foregoing future at this point in time, given where we are. So I wholeheartedly appreciate the idea that we're going to be looking at things more operationally. Why are we doing things not because of the money, but because of what's right, and then right-sizing our district for what works for our children, and then funding towards it. But it's interesting to me that there's, this board, comments earlier this evening that this board's at fault because we eliminated some teaching staff last year. No, we had to do something. The dollars don't exist. And we can continue to take out a fund balance. We are going to have to in certain places. We already knew we were going to. The PSERS stuff is not what I'm talking about. That was there on purpose. We did that as an intentional burn down to get used to the new PSERS rate. But you can't, as much as you need to look at the operational of the district and say what's best for the district, we only have so much runway. And so we need to maybe look at some programs. If we don't need them, we don't need them. If we want to have more teachers here or more staff there for the core subjects, which I wholeheartedly support, then maybe we need to look elsewhere of where we're going to find the funds to pay for that, because the community is already being taxed all the way to the max. And I know that we all said that we're not going to take the exceptions, and I think that was brought up earlier today. But I think we all realize, where is it going to come from? So unless there are some hard discussions about program changes or referendum, okay, we can go either way. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. And this is, I'm not sorry, you're standing there. I know you know this very well. But I mean, I just want to be sure that as we get all impassioned about the things that as individuals we're most interested in the district, it's a balancing act. And this budget actually really points it out pretty clearly, in my opinion. So back to kind of what we're here for tonight. This is the proposed final budget. It needs a whole lot more work. There's more discussion to be had around maybe some of the staffing stuff we heard tonight, maybe some other topics, and then looking at the capital and kind of what we have to do, which is another place. This budget doesn't even include that. So we already are saying monies may have to come from somewhere else unless we have a surplus. Unless we have funds left over this year not spent because perhaps we didn't fill a position or something like that, that will help us to fund the capital, which I'm expecting to see something of in the projection.
And that's one of the things that we've been talking about as administrators is some ways that we can help pay for the capital, at least for this 17-18 budget year.
Mm-hmm.
It will help us get through the hump, and we'll be presenting more on that at the May 9th meeting.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Thank you.
I guess I have a comment. So I agree with a lot of what Ms. Booker said, but she points out some salient features here. I have to point out, though, that one of the reasons that things look the way they do does have a historical basis here, and it has to do with this board in the past not going to index. And I think the index was set up by the state to follow the inflation rate, and I think that school districts were expected to consider going to the index as a rational, consistent, steady funding source. And this board, this goes back, has not consistently agreed on that as a method of moving forward. So you see us at this point in time, and what you're saying is correct at this point in time, but there is a history on why this looks the way it does. And I know this is going to engender more comments.
Come on, Lydia.
But that's true. And you were accusing me of editorializing earlier. I think you just did a long editorial that just some of it's true and all of it's true, but there's more to the story.
So what's more to the story? We had serial years of significant surpluses, correct? We also, in the years in which we had 0% tax increases, we ratcheted up spending far away above where we should have. Okay, the participation in this situation is not just driven by revenue, but frankly, from my perspective, it was driven far more by absolutely feckless spending, because there was no willingness on the part of many on this board to take a look at what we were proposing was going to cost, despite repeated requests by myself and Ms. Booker, among others, who said, this is unsustainable. We are going to hit a wall. We can't afford this over time. And so we've hit the wall. Here we are. And you can go back and review the record. Go back and review the
part
record.
of why we hit the wall is because we chose not to go to index for a number of years. So I just...
And I voted
okay.
against that both times. Just saying. So you're right, Lydia. There's a lot of reasons why we are where we are. There's never, just a one-liner. But we are in this situation. And I'm really looking forward to looking at the operation of the district in a different way, separate from money, but just what do we need and what does it need to be? And I'm thankful for the earlier discussion this evening to get us off on that track. I look forward to hearing more about the programmatic understandings and studies and works that we're going to get from our administration, and appreciate the fact that this is not something our community, members of our community, not all members of our community, but members of our community are going to struggle with this second year in a row of this maximum tax increase. So I'm just respectful of trying to understand where everybody sits on this out in the community and how it impacts people, as I'm sure all of you are as well.
Well, I think that's fair. We all do. And I was really encouraged by hearing you say something, which is that we're going to move forward looking at what we need programmatically.
Yep.
And that's
I think it's what we need programmatically, and how can we deliver certain services that we currently deliver differently. I mean, that's one of the things that I think in, not just our district, but I think public education in general, doesn't necessarily hit the forefront in terms of how we might do some things differently, just because we can, because we're now in, well into the 21st century, and there are other ways to do certain tasks that we are still doing as if we were looking at the world as they did in 1920 or 1930, or decades before. So I look forward to taking the opportunity as we move forward with this to be creative in ways in which we can deliver services differently and preserve everything that's good about what Radnor offers its children. And mine have prospered tremendously from the education they got here. And that is important to keep in place for Dave's kids and all the kids still coming forward through.
So I guess go ahead.
I just have a couple interesting facts here, because we're not alone in this in Pennsylvania, the different school districts. Across the state of Pennsylvania, according to PSBA, since the 2010-2011, staffing has decreased 4.3%, the cost of staffing. So the school districts have done a really good job with the monies that they've been able to spend. The pension has increased 257%. And that's one of the things that we're dealing with, is the fact that so much of the money that is going towards the pension situation that we're looking at the state to try to fix. I just throw that out there because it's something that our state legislators need to realize. That has to be fixed, and that's what's costing districts an enormous amount of money, and the frustration level is very high across the entire state of Pennsylvania. And we are in a very good position here compared to many other districts, and just the fact that we're talking about a curriculum-driven budget is something that we can be proud of.
Well, and I think all of us on this board had the foresight. Part of the reason we had the fund balance was to cover those PSERS expenditures that we knew were going to be large increases the last few years. So I think it was credit to the administration as well that we had prudent budgeting to handle those big increases of 30%.
So are there any other questions for Michelle on this topic?
Oh, Michelle, no.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and sit down?
Thank you,
Michelle. Yeah, appreciate that. How about some any more board discussion?
I was going to make a motion.
Okay.
Right, we have to do that, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I make this motion with a little bit of, I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say heavy heart, but I do. That the board adopt a 2017-18 proposed final general budget in the amount of $96,615, $96,615,289, representing the final real estate tax increase of 0.7868. It's changed. 7868 mils, or 3.4275% over the 2016-17 budget.
So moved. Or second.
Is there a second?
Yeah, Mike seconded. I made the motion.
All in favor?
Are we going to have any board discussion? Because it's not really a long discussion. It's not going to be a long thing. When we voted for the budget last year and we did make the reductions that we made, I asked last year about, going to want to hear about the impacts of the changes. I've been asking for that in finance since January, so I really appreciate the information that we got tonight. But some of it, my sneaking suspicion and then the anecdotal stuff about class size has borne out in the information tonight. And I'm really sorry that it's April, but that's, I have been asking for this for a while. So my only question is, in what fashion will we have a conversation about what to do if we need more teachers to deal with some of the class size issues? Because the maintenance budget doesn't address that. So what's the plan for that conversation? And if you tell me finance, Patty, that's fine. We can talk about it in finance. I just want to know what the plan is before I vote on this tonight.
Yeah, it was my understanding that based on the input and the work that they've done, and for clarity, I know we've all been asking for the staffing feedback, but I do believe early in the beginning, we said, and even when Dr. Costello was here, that we wanted to wait until the middle school and the high school got to see their first pass through next year's planning before we would get to see that. So that was why we got it tonight. So it's my expectation that we will have follow-up from administration at the next Finance Committee meeting, as you all churn through this information as well, and that you'll be making some proposal for us to discuss at Finance, and then we'll move it forward to the board. That's my expectation.
Is that's the plan then? So because
I would.
That's what I'm.
Get
yeah.
confirmation.
Yes,
But
yeah,
that was
we
my
can continue to
expectation.
have that discussion, and we can continue to have that discussion in finance. We do have, those watch positions that are in there, and we can have that discussion as well. And I think some of this discussion might also lend itself to what are those district goals we want to establish for next year. Maybe some of these are areas that we want to look at so that we're not at this place that we're discussing here, as we're looking at the budget, these impacts. So what are some of those larger district goals we might want to set, which we can discuss over the next 2 months as well?
Yeah, I think there's also, when we see the projections, we'll see that there's a couple of positions, not a lot, but there's a couple of positions we hadn't filled this year that are in the budget. So we may find that that's able to be moved over to teachers or something in this next budget.
Let's not forget
we'll
the
see.
$300,000 from prescriptions. That benefit is not yet in these numbers. So there is, I think it's important to get as much of the additional information together before we
for
decide.
the next session.
That's fair. I just, don't want anybody to be surprised, if if the teacher piece doesn't get, the class size issue doesn't get addressed. I waited to hear what the impact was, and here it is. And I appreciate how hard all the, principals say we're going to work and we manage. Class size is class size. So, but that's fine. So Finance Committee is the place. Great. Thank you.
At least for the next round.
Thank you.
Well, any other discussion from the board before we call a vote? Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I don't think any of us up here relish raising our own taxes or raising taxes on our friends that we're going to see this weekend and say, why did you do that? I have a friend that pays almost $39,000 a year in property taxes, so almost 4%. It's going to hit him a little more than it's going to hit me. But I have to express my gratitude to Michelle and all the administrators for all the hard work that they've done, because this is the second budget that I'm voting on, I believe. And we've almost had 2 or 3 different budget processes since I've been on the board, because, we had a budget process that was in place with one super, and then he left, and then we had an interim super who kind of fixed it, but, left it to the new super to do the budget process as he chose, because, it would turned out to be Ken. So it would, we want to do a process that Ken wants to run. So we've kind of had almost 2 maintenance budgets here, but as everyone said, if you want more teachers to reduce class size, but, we have these mandatory expenditure increases based on the collective bargaining agreements that we've already signed, where are you going to get the money from? The days of raising the budgets 8% a year, 7%, 5%, 4%, whatever we need, it's over, with Act 1. So it's going to come from one end or the other. And that's what we got to start looking at the day after this budget is passed in May. Take Wednesday off, and then Thursday we got to start looking at this stuff from the bottom up again.
Yeah. So we'll vote. All in favor of the recommendation as read by Mrs. Booker, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 9-0. Item number 2 is the request to approve Delaware County Community College 2017-2018 budget.
So moved.
Well, I have a
Oh, you have to do
blurb to tell you about it. The 2017-18 Delaware County Community Budget was approved by the college's Board of Trustees on March 15th and is presented for consideration and approval by the Radnor Township School Board of Directors in the amount of $92,091,619, of which, now that's their total budget, Radnor's share is based on the market valuation formula and is $1,427,616, which is an increase of $3,645 over the 2016-2017 budget. And I want to give you just some context for that from our liaison meeting. So the Delaware County Community College Liaison Committee met on March 29th. It was Dr. Jerry Parker's last meeting as president. And the salient features of this budget that I want you to be aware of is that it is a 1% increase overall for their entire budget. And it includes a 4.8% increase in student tuition. So students are bearing the vast brunt of the budget increase, not the districts. Student tuition now makes up 55% of the budget. Radnor's share, which I already read to you, is only up $4,000 some odd dollars from last year. And the rest of this I'll cover in my report about the community college.
Lydia, do you want to read the recommendation? I did already. You read the intro, right?
Yeah, I already read it. Okay, the recommendation, sorry. That the board approve and adopt the budget of the Delaware County Community College for the fiscal year 2017-2018 in the form and amounts prescribed, totaling $92,091,619, with Radnor's share being, again, $1,427,616, and direct the proper officers to submit the same for approval to the Department of Education of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This will be a roll call vote.
Michelle, will you call the vote, please?
Mr. Falcone.
Second.
Oh, right. So. Second.
Seconded it.
Mr. Falcone.
Aye.
Mrs. Michelson. Aye. Mrs. Bonenberger.
Aye.
Mrs. Booker. Yes. Mrs. Goldman. Aye. Mr. Madden.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Solomon.
Yes.
Ms. Stern.
Aye.
Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you. Our third item will be the election of trustee reappointments for Delaware County Community College.
The three names up for re-election for the Delaware County Community College trustees are Stephen Gambizio, David Grossman, and Marilyn Spicer. They are all currently serving on the board, and they're asking to seek reappointment to a new 6-year term. Their terms expire June 30th, 2017, so the new terms will be effective July 1st, 2017. We discussed this at the liaison committee meeting, and it is the recommendation of the Delaware County Community Administration as well as the liaison committee that these three members be reappointed to the board.
Do you want to read the recommendation as written?
Okay, the recommendation that the board vote and reappoint Stephen Gambizia, thank you, David Grossman, and Marilyn Spicer as trustees to the Delaware County Community College Board of Trustees, effective July 1st, 2017. This is also a roll call vote.
Is there a second?
Second.
Michelle, will you call the vote, please?
Mr. Falcone.
Aye.
Mrs. Michelson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bonenberger.
Aye.
Mrs. Booker. Mrs. Goldman. Aye. Mr. Madden.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Solomon.
Yes.
Ms. Stern.
Aye.
Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll next move to the consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. With the consent of all members, they are therefore grouped and approval is given in one motion. In the event a board member wants to discuss any item, the board president will move it to an appropriate place on the agenda. Are there any items that a board member would like to pull from consent this evening?
I wanted to pull 15.
15.
I'll pull 4.
4 and 15.
I move that we approve the consent agenda items 5 through 14 and 16 and item 16.
Is there a second? All in favor? 9-0. Any opposed? Seeing none, 9-0. Number 4, Chuck.
Yes, I'd like to amend the minutes to include the comments that Ms. Spurtle requested. I felt that they were very important, some of the things that were left out, especially the one about the new clubs and the purpose of them. I think it's important that that's put back in.
Yeah, I'll second that.
May I add something? I don't know if it should come as an amendment to this or if it's for later business, but last month we voted on a service provider of CCRES to provide educational services to the district. Wasn't a lot of money, not to exceed $18,000. I think people should know that this company, CCRES, is run by our former superintendent, Michael Kelly. I don't think anything untoward happened. I don't think that any process wasn't followed. I think everything's fine. It's just that in the interest of transparency, I'd like it to be noted that it's the company he now is in charge of.
So, Michelle, on that, would we make a note in the minutes for this meeting?
Well, is that
I'm going to defer to Mike.
Good call.
Yeah, it would probably be best at the end of the meeting is there the board comment section to provide that as a comment, then it can be reflected in the minutes under board comment that was made versus trying to amend last month's meetings to include that since it didn't actually come up in last month's meeting.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so there was a motion by Chuck. I seconded. All in favor of adopting Ms. Spurtle's comments to the minutes?
I'm sorry to be nitpicky, but what exactly, do we need to say what exactly we're going to put in the meeting? Or just whatever she said? Or what, like, I'm sorry to be nitpicky, but what are we, do we need to stipulate?
Ms. Spurtle, do you have exactly what you said?
She made a comment that we should reference that Dave Wood was speaking on behalf of Maya K. Van Rossum.
And then also something for the
Clarifying
club.
that public
And something clarifying her comments about the club.
The comments about the club.
It was specific language that was not in the minutes.
About providing a safe space or
Providing a
something.
safe space.
Is that the gist of it, Cindy?
So we'll make an amendment to those two sections of the minutes to reflect the comments from Ms. Spurtle. And then the board will be voting on those minutes as amended with those additions. Any other comment on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You spoke too quick. I appreciate a clarification of the public comment. I'm going to vote against this. I think it is a dangerous path to be amending our minutes to be more specific about what people said. Minutes are supposed to reflect board action and public comment. This was the very conversation we had when we had the policy discussion about at policy about meeting 006 about what are minutes supposed to be. And you all can vote for this, but I'm just saying it's a dangerous path to be going down every month where we have to amend our minutes because somebody in the public feels that not enough of the gist of what they said during public comment was conveyed. It's a dangerous path. I'm just sharing that concern. The clarification about Mr. Wood speaking on behalf of Ms. Van Rossum, I think that is a very well taken point.
Well, I'll just comment that we often hear requests to amend our minutes, and it's seldom done. I think tonight is an exception that Chuck thinks is relevant. I agree with him on that specific instance, but your point is well noted. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It is, I'm sorry, Susan, so you voted in favor?
I said I would vote for it, but I'm raising it as a concern. It is a concern to me. I think it's a dangerous path. I think her point is well taken about Mr. Wood.
Okay, thank you. So it's 8-1. Next would be number, I think it was 14? 15. Yes.
15. So this policy came about, I believe Amy brought it to our attention. Laura Marion has a similar policy, and it was sort of modeled on that. And it's a great practice. We should have orientation when you start a board. I appreciated mine, and I hope it continues every 2 years. The question I have is, I really saw this as a best practice. And so my question is, how many best practices should we convert into a formal policy? Because we can do that all day long, and it's not like the policy committee doesn't have enough work to do. For example, I think it's a best practice to review our class sizes every year in our programming. Should we make that a policy? I think it's just as worthy as doing orientation. I love this practice that we've done this month of, Michelle showing our budget to do a maintenance budget. I think it's a great idea. It shows a lot. Is that a best practice or is that a policy? I could go on and on with wonderful things that have happened just today that are best practices that sure we could consider as policies. So my question is, where do we draw the line if we make this a policy when I really see it as a best practice?
Great point. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but it's here. I don't particularly object to policying it if that's what we want to do, but I do think your point, whether we pass or don't pass this, I think your point is well taken and ought to be considered as other things like this come up down the road, if not this one.
Do you want me to take it? You go ahead.
I was just going to offer a comment. I think we talked about this a little bit at the meeting. If you remember, Julia, there were some requests to amend it to make it more specific, and we backed off of those requests for that very reason, that we were going kind of beyond what was a best practice and getting into kind of more specifics that I felt went beyond what we should be doing as a board and policy. I think this landed at a comfortable spot for me that didn't go beyond that, though I think your warning is well made. I think we have to be mindful of these types of things. And I think, again, where we ended on this specific policy, to me, heeded your warning at the policy committee meeting and kept it away from what really is a best practice. I think specifically was we should require all board members to attend along with the superintendent and other folks. And we backed off of that position and said it would just be new members. And then if leadership wanted to attend, they could, and anybody else for that matter. So that's my thought on it.
So what if a new board member doesn't want to participate?
And we actually talked about that too, Patty.
It's a policy.
Yeah, we went away from that because I raised that issue at the policy meeting. It can't be mandatory. It's a suggestion. That we had talked about, Julia, if you remember, there was a discussion about what was mandatory, and I said, what if they can't schedule it? What if it just doesn't work for them? You can't hold them up, and they can't immediately be in violation of a board policy simply because their schedule didn't work. That was a discussion we had at the committee, isn't that?
No, I was just going to say that's the reason that we struck in the last sentence. All new board members are expected to participate. We said should endeavor, for that very reason, Patty. And to answer Julia's, or to comment on Julia's, posing of this, because she and I did have this conversation at the chair vice chair level. I was not overly offended by this policy. In fact, I'm not at all offended. I think that I found the orientation program to be very helpful. Dave and I did it together. And, it's one of those, but I think that her point was well taken, and she and I both talked about, if it feels like all of a sudden we're coming up with new policy after new policy after new policy, absent those required by law, because, by the way, we are quite busy with those required by state law, that is not a practice that we want to continue. But I thought that this was I thought that this was a pretty comfortable way to codify some of the work that I feel like our board has worked really hard to do in the last year, particularly since Julia and Amy and Mike came on the board, and some of the board work that we've done, which is to try to have a common understanding of our role on the board, and in partnership particularly with our new superintendent, to have us be the best board we can be. And this particular policy felt really consistent with that.
Any other discussion from the board on this?
Julia, do you want to move it, or you pulled it and yes, no?
Similar to the last line that we discussed, I'm wary of precedent. This doesn't offend me. I think it's a great idea. I would like, as a committee, to maybe talk about our own guidelines for structuring what's the best practice and what's policy worthy. So I fully support this, but with caution.
Do you want to move it, and I'll second?
Sure.
Great.
I move to, I don't know the language. What am I?
So I move that we
I move that we pass the orientation program for new members policy 004 for adoption.
For
How'd I
first
do?
reading.
For first read, I beg your pardon.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. 9-0. That takes care of our consent agenda. Now we move to reports from our board liaisons. Representatives are asked to report on items pertinent to school district business. The Delaware County Community College.
Can you come back to that? I got to find my note.
Sure. Delaware County Intermediate Unit.
Nothing new.
Federal Relations Network.
No report.
IU Legislative Council, Pennsylvania School Boards Association.
No report.
Parks and Recreation.
Yes, our last meeting included an extensive review of the proposed trail, Radnor Trail extension between its current stopping point along Radnor-Chester Road, that point across Radnor-Chester and up to the Blue Route, what do you call them, wall?
Yeah.
Anyway, there was the sound barrier, right. The gist of it, there was a lot to be said about it. It included discussions around parking, around proposed culvert for moving under Radnor-Chester Road, and then other discussions about the nature of the trail and so on and so forth. It was interesting. I would encourage all families in our district in Radnor to stay on top of this. It was informative, and there will be more to discuss.
Thank you. Delaware County Community College.
Looping back, I
Round
just
two.
have a brief statement on what else was discussed at the liaison committee. We received a report on the state budget and how it will impact community colleges, the community college enrollment, the dual enrollment program, and distance education. So if anyone's interested in those, please contact me and I can give you details.
Thank you. PTO Coordinating Council.
The PTO Coordinating Council met last night, and some of the topics covered were a social media discussion. The PTO presidents wanted to know more about some of the social media curriculum in the district. So Sue Dahlstrom, the West librarian, and Catherine Horan, the Radnor Middle School librarian, came and discussed, gave a really interesting overview of the digital citizenship curriculum in grades K through 12. They even covered the high school. And the second item that was discussed was an update on the Radnor PTO Homework Club grant. The letter of intent for these clubs was submitted to the Radnor Educational Foundation and approved to move forward for a full grant. So the grant is requesting $6,000 per elementary school that will be given to the PTOs to start a homework club in the next school year. Then there was Dr. McGuigan mentioned this speaker who's coming on August 30th to speak to staff, George Koros, and his book, Innovator's Mindset, is something that the staff members and administrators are reading in preparation for that, and extra copies, yes, I have one too. The books there were some extra copies, and Dr. McGuigan gave them out to the PTO presidents to read. And then the final agenda item was a discussion about renaming the PTSA Coordinating Council to better reflect what that is all about. So there were a few new names proposed and some steps taken to try to have that name ultimately be more reflective of what that meeting is all about.
Thank you. Radnor Educational Foundation and the Radnor Alumni Council.
Yes, the REF is having a fundraiser soon. It's the Derby Day fundraiser. Go to the website to see if any more tickets are available because they were pretty close to selling out yesterday. So they may have already sold out, but that is it.
Thanks. Radnor High School Scholarship Fund.
Thanks. The Radnor High School Scholarship Fund is having their Recipe for Success kitchen tour this Sunday, April 30th from 1 to 5. You can purchase tickets at the Wayne Arts Center. They're still available, and you can get them on Sunday afternoon, and then you will be able to tour 6 really great kitchens in the Wayne St. David's area. And this is an important fundraiser for the scholarship program, so even if you're not able to attend, do not let that stop you from making a donation to RadnorScholarshipFund.com.
Thank you. And Radnor Page?
Yes, Radnor Page will hold its annual business meeting on Wednesday, May 10th. It will begin at 6:30 at Radnor Elementary. And then at 7 o'clock that night, Jim Kearney, who is our supervisor of instruction for the gifted, will give a little talk and speak with parents about their children's experience of gifted support in the district. And then following that at 7:30 that night, cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Allison Mackey will speak on a topic called Supporting Your Child's Optimal Brain Development, which is the latest research for supporting the best academic outcomes for our children, and all parents are welcome.
Thank you. So new business. I know Julia has some.
Yes, I would just like it stated for the record that last month when we voted to approve on services provided by CCRES, that organization is now led by our former superintendent, Dr. Michael Kelly.
Any other new business?
Before we go to any other board announcements or public comment, I just wanted to thank the board for the thoughtful conversation tonight about the budget. You know, it is when you get commissioned to be a superintendent in a district, it takes on a whole nother level, and the idea of all that is involved with that commissioning and the thoughtful conversation the board is having here. We need to be good stewards of our tax dollars, and the reality is, as the board was discussing here tonight, as we want to look at individual programs, there is a point too where we have to look at it all. And how does it affect the overall budget as we look at those? So I look forward to further discussions about how we want to look at our curriculum programs and how we want to move in the forward to continue to make sure we have the best education for the students of the Radnor community. So I thank you for the conversation tonight.
Thank you. Board announcements. Our next set of meetings will be, and I think there's a chance it might move, so stay tuned, but on May 2nd in the administration building at 5 o'clock will be policy. Potentially at 6, potentially at 4 will be facilities, and then at 7 will be government relations and communications. I think the board is going to decide on that facilities time, so please, again, stay tuned there. On May 9th at the administration building at 4:30 will be curriculum. At 6 p.m. will be finance. And then on May 25th, here again in the Radnor Township building at 7 p.m., May 25th, we'll have our next board business meeting. Now we'll ask for some more public comment. Again, citizens are welcomed and encouraged at this time to address the board, to comment on matters of concern, official action, or deliberation, which are or may be before the board. Speakers are respectfully requested to avoid redundancy and to limit their comments to issues for which there was no previous opportunity to offer remarks. If you haven't already, we ask that you please sign in on the back table and clearly state your name and street address and topic to be addressed when you come to the microphone. Individual comments should be limited to not more than 4 minutes, and that's per our board policy. Like earlier in the evening, if you're unable to attend the board meeting, please submit your comments by email to boardquestions@rtsd.org or in written form to Mr. Michael Petiti, Radnor Township School District, 135 South Wayne Avenue, Wayne, Pennsylvania, 19087. Welcome back, Roberta.
Welcome. I would just like to echo Superintendent Batchelor's comments regarding the nature of the discussion about the budget, and I would like to thank Michelle particularly for making the budget more understandable each year, because it's always a bear to get through. I would also like to remind, as Ms. Michelson did, the importance of paying attention to what's happening at the Park and Rec Board, and those meetings are now televised and put on the district website. at the township website, I'm sorry, which previously was not done. So we're grateful that the Park and Rec Board meetings are now televised.
Because we haven't had a televised meeting in ages.
They were supposed to be. I'm sorry if they weren't. I will follow up on that.
Oh, moving forward, okay.
I will follow up on that, Ms. Michelson.
Well, we've been meeting upstairs, that's why. I mean, we've only just returned to this room the last meeting or two.
If that's the case,
yeah.
we'll make sure they're taped upstairs. Also, I would like to remind regarding item number 6 on the acceptance of gifts, grants, and donations. There was a $950 donation by the Radnor Education Foundation to fund the National Sea Perch registration fee, and I believe it's our responsibility to note those gifts each meeting. So please do that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Well, hi. So I'm good and signed up. I haven't done this before, so sort of new. I'm Dr. Andrew Babson. I'm a professor at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm also a school board candidate, so I thought I should mention that. So I just wanted to make a statement about school class size. And the evidence on this issue is rather overwhelming. There really isn't much debate. And it's not an issue of correlation. It really is a causal effect that reduction of class size has. Some of you may be familiar with a very famous educational study. It's called the Tennessee STAR Project, or Student-Teacher Achievement Ratio Project. So between 1985 and 1989, 79 schools in Tennessee were studied to look at K through third grade reduction in class size effects. And the effects were overwhelming. There really isn't much debate on this particular issue, and that randomized, multi-level, multi-year longitudinal study firmly established that reducing class size has causal effects on student achievement. And these effects are especially pronounced for students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So high poverty backgrounds, which are often correlated with ethnic minority backgrounds. Okay, so that data set is still being reviewed and still being studied. There are a number of studies that have come out just in the past few years on this. So I don't know how I'm doing on time here, but I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware that class size has causal positive effects on student learning. And if we're going to look at what the best investment is for Radnor schools, I think class size needs to be right at the top of the list in terms of what investment that we can make to improve instruction, okay? And to think about the long-term picture of investing in Radnor schools, okay? So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome back, Cindy.
Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. Just one quick item that I did not mention earlier, and that was brought up, and that's current open positions. The question, after looking at the old administrative organizational chart back in October of 14, there was a director of operations, and that position was split, I believe, between Mr. Stitzel and Michelle. And that's a reason in the synopsis of expenditure of financial summary for March as to why the administration wages had decreased. So the question is whether those are planned to be filled in the new budget. I want to thank again, the presentations that were made and sitting through the workshop on the budget. I'd like to thank the staff and the teachers and the importance that was stressed on class size. My concern, as expressed earlier, about raising taxes on the residents of Radnor. There is another way to do it, and it was brought up by Ms. Booker. And that's the study. It appears now it's going to be going to what is exactly does Radnor Township need to make this the best school district in the state. And if that means that we need to add to staff, add to teachers, reduce class sizes, which was just presented, then the other alternative is to go out for referendum. And you've got to trust the Radnor residents once you present to them what you feel is the best school system that they can give their children. And we've never done that. Any time that discussion has come up, it's been nixed almost immediately. So there has to be a trust factor of Radnor residents that there might come up with, yes, we're willing to do that if it means that it's a better education for our children. So think about that carefully as we're coming into these future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome back, Judy.
Thank you. Judy Sherry, Governor Circle, Newtown Square. So I was thinking about my first comments about the budget workshop where public comment was not permitted. And I thought, you can rename a lot of committees to workshops and eliminate public comment that way. So who potentially could benefit when public comment is eliminated? Another way to look at it is there are 4 incumbents on the school board who can use board meetings to promote their candidacy. Rarely is their speech limited. They can opine endlessly and pontificate away. And that would be Ms. Stern, Ms. Solomon, Ms. Michelson, and Mr. Falcone. Other school board candidates who are running for election don't have this opportunity. And without their participation, voters have to guess what their opinions are on specific issues and what concerns they have, or maybe how effective they'll be if they were on the board once the elections took place. So I put that out there as another thought about eliminating public comment. And also, I want to, underline what Ms. Bertle said, because oftentimes you feel or you hear that the ability to raise taxes is limited by Act 1, and really, there's always the option of referendum. And if you can justify to the voters, and I think the voters in Radnor are a very well-educated and concerned group of residents, if you can justify why you need to raise their taxes, then you can go out and ask them for a raise. So, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, Dave.
I'm back again. I missed coming up twice the last meeting, so I have to do it now. We had a discussion earlier about during the budget discussion about budgeted expenses and honoring our current CBAs with the budgeted amounts, and that they would exceed the Act 1 index and even the Act 1 index with exceptions. And while that's true in the budget as it's been presented, I think the one thing that you all know, and I don't know that the public knows it, is that there are retirements that take place every year, and those retirements are going to reduce the total number or the total budgeted amount, and we never consider that going into the year, and it will always drop it. We know how much it drops it by because we have years of projected retirements without incentives, with incentives, whatever you want to look at. So I saw a statistic up there that was 98.5% of taxpayers are going to pay their taxes next year. Well, how do you know that? We certainly have a much better idea about how many people are going to retire this year. So I think in the budget in the future, what you should consider is what's the projected number of retirements, and then figure out what the savings are based on that, and use that as your number, as your budgeted number, as you are with other things such as our revenue due to taxes. And it would be a much better way to do accurate budgeting, because now you're not including that. So if we have 10 retirees this year, which you may or may not have based on the numbers of the past, I can guess pretty well what you'll have. But if you have 10 retirees, you're going to save $500,000. So, and you're going to reduce PCERS costs. You're going to reduce a lot of other things in your budget as well. And I don't think that's reflected in the budget that you see. So I just wanted to make that comment. The other thing that I wanted to say briefly is the drug dog issue. While I'm not going to comment directly on the issue itself, I do want to say that there are elementary school teachers that have in the past brought their dogs in therapy, trained therapy dogs in to have reluctant readers read to them because they're afraid to read to other people out loud, and it's been greatly helpful. They're denied that opportunity now, and the dog has been prevented from coming into the school for that reason. However, we're going to bring a dog in to sniff for drugs. And while I think that's a great, it could be a great thing and you want to prevent drugs from being in the school, I certainly understand all of that, and I understand the civil liberties concerns as well. But I think you have to look at a dog being used for therapeutic purposes as well as a positive for our students. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Any other public comment?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Oh, no, I want to
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.